Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. We're talking freight. We're going to talk sports. We're going to talk Ukraine. We're going to talk claims, Q&A. We got it all today. Episode 134 of the Freight 360 podcast. Welcome back, everybody. We're glad you're joining us. If you haven't done so already, leave us that nice review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your good podcasts and listen to us. And share us with your friends. We're growing, and we like the new listenership. So keep sharing us. Keep sending us your questions. All right. Today's episode is we're going to give a high-level overview on claims and kind of talk through the process of how it works. It's one of those things that will eventually inevitably happen in your career as a freight broker, and maybe you're not the one that handles the claim, but you should understand how the process works because you're going to have to explain to your customer your company's process and really the big picture on it. So I've got a quick sports update here. I know I mentioned last week that my somewhat hometown local St. Bonaventure basketball team, so is the basically, if you don't make the NCAA's tournament in March, there's the secondary one called the NIT, and they made the Final Four in that, but they did lose. I think it was earlier this week. So, but hey, they gave it a nice stretch. The NCAA side of it, the underdog St. Peter's, they made it to like the Elite Eight first time. Yeah. That's happened in a very. They're like ranked 15th, I think, in their group, but coming down to the Final Four in the championship in the next week here, we've got Duke, Villanova, North Carolina, and Kansas left. Villanova, Kansas, and Duke are all number 1 or 2 teams, and North Carolina was ranked 8, so they were middle of the pack in their group. But coming to an end, obviously March Madness as we approach April here has to come to an end. But outside of basketball, the NFL did officially change its overtime rules thanks to the Bills-Chiefs game last year. So now both teams are guaranteed in the playoffs to possess the ball at least once in overtime. You remember the greatest 20 to 30 minutes in playoff football happened in Arrowhead Stadium, and the Bills and the Chiefs went back and forth, and Josh Allen didn't even get to touch the ball in overtime, and it pissed a lot of people off. So that's a new change this year. Bills are finally approved for their new stadium, $1.4 billion stadium in Orchard Park, right across from the existing stadium, so Bills fans will get to see that in 2026. Scotty Scheffler, golfer, won the match play tournament this past weekend. Did you watch that at all?
I did not.
I actually bet on that one, and I won. It was good.
Did you? Nice. I watched some of it on Saturday, but I didn't get to watch it on Sunday.
Yeah. He had like a 5-stroke lead at one point, but it got close, and then it ended up getting to I think it was like there might have been like 2 holes left when by the time he knew it. It might have been like 3 holes left by the time he knew that he won. So, but yeah, so that's my quick down and dirty sports. Baseball starts next week, April 7th. My team that I like, the Boston Red Sox, will be playing at New York against the Yankees next weekend. So. Baseball is back. Full season here. Lockout's obviously over. So, anything else around sports? Oh, did you hear the Spring Football League, the USFL? Pittsburgh got a team. They're starting like I think next month. It's like one of those experimental added-on football leagues. Like they've had
is it like in stadiums, AAF, or is it going to be in
XFL? They've had like all different kinds of like experimental leagues over the decades, and there's another one this year. So, yeah. Pittsburgh.
Where are they playing at? Do you know?
What's that?
Like, where are they playing out of in Pittsburgh?
No. So I think this year they're doing it as a bubble in Birmingham, if I read it correctly, where all 8 teams are all going to do the entire 10-game season in Birmingham, which Birmingham has a team as well. I think like Houston, Birmingham, Pittsburgh, like either New Jersey or New York. Michigan has one. Yeah. There's 8 teams, 10 games, and I believe they're doing it all in one location to test it out this year. Something like that. I could be wrong. I was just reading an article on it yesterday. So That's your sports update for the week. What do we got around the world as far as news goes, Ben? What's happening with Ukraine?
So, not much updates as in regards to the war, other than the fact that Ukraine has taken back some ground, pushed back some of the troops back out of Kiev. It seems like they're moving pretty east. But we talk a lot about this, and we did an episode a few weeks ago on impacts of global issues. What's going on in the global economy? How does that affect you? How do you see these things? And I saw an article yesterday, and I had known this obviously because my wife's from Ukraine, but Ukraine is a huge producer of wheat on the world scale. In fact, I think it is, I can't remember which organization it is that feeds like the most amount of hungry people in the world. Like, I don't remember if it was like the World Kitchen or whatever it was. Like, it was a humanitarian program, a huge one. They get literally 50% of the food that they use to feed people in poverty countries from Ukraine and some parts of Russia. And 50% of it they're not going to have this year. Well, on top of that, there was another article that was talking about like the global food impact of the war, and like between Russia and Ukraine, they supply 30% of the world's wheat. They contribute 20% of the global maize and up to 80% of the sunflower seed oil. Now, what's interesting is that is going to affect everything, right? Because when you have that much supply by one area and it not being there, what does that do? Drives up prices, drives up demand for sunflower seed oil, wheat, and things domestically in the United States and other countries. And there's another article that happened to come out today that was on FreightWaves. We'll put the link in the show notes. And same issue, but it's happening for another reason in the United States. Grain shippers want regulators to press the railroads for service issues. The railroads have been notoriously interrupted with what's happened during the pandemic, understaffing, just ebbs and flows in demand, to the point where, like, anecdotally, there were a couple companies they interviewed. It was like the National Grain and Feed Association said one of its members had spent almost $3 million in the secondary freight market just getting animal feed because they couldn't get the rail shipments in on time. So when you're looking for opportunities and you're looking for things that are coming down and are likely to be around for enough time that it's worth prospecting, this is one that, like, I'm going to be prospecting. I'm going to be looking at sunflower seed oil. I'm going to be looking at wheat. I mean, to be honest, a lot of that ships on, like, hopper bottoms and rail cars. But again, when the normal can't get there, when the trains that normally carry this can't get it and people are willing to, they have to pay for it. Otherwise, your animals don't eat, right? This is the scenarios that we talk about all the time on ideal customers. If it doesn't get there, there is a huge cost. Literally, their largest asset, all the animals on the farm, don't eat, don't survive. So it doesn't matter if it's an extra $300-400 to move that load. If they can't get it, they'll pay it because they need it, right? Those are the types of things that are putting strains on even just domestic supply chains. They're going to create opportunities for freight brokers and truck drivers.
That's crazy. And for those of you who don't know what maize is, because you didn't listen in 5th grade, that's corn. Right? Is that what the natives
little throwback to Thanksgiving when you're in 5th grade?
Remember making those
in the cornucopia?
Yeah, the cornucopia. I remember making like a turkey out of you trace your hand. Yeah. Well, good stuff. Let's give a shout out to our friends over at DAT Freight and Analytics before we hop into today's topic.
Taking the guesswork out of freight with DAT. The DAT Loadboard Network is the largest on-demand freight marketplace in North America, connecting freight brokers with available capacity on any lane. You can grow your business with tools that allow you to find new business partners, and you can quickly qualify and onboard new carriers. And with the industry's leading freight rate data, you can make clear and confident pricing decisions. Check out the show notes for a free month of Power, Express, or Trucker's Edge.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk claims, man. Claims. So,
what is a claim?
What is a claim, right? Think about your car, right? We carry insurance on our car. You get in an accident. Well, how do you get the money to fix your car? You have to file a claim. The same thing goes with health insurance. You have a hospital bill. Insurance is going to pay for it. The hospital has to file a claim to get the money from the insurance company. Well, I would say ironically enough, but it's not. It's conceptually the same. It all applies to freight as well. So if you have a claim on a freight shipment, the same kind of basic process will happen. So let's break down the parties involved and the steps that will happen in a nutshell, and then we can peel back the layers. So as you onboard carriers, one of the things that you have to vet is that they're carrying the proper amount of insurance. So the big ticket item here is going to be your cargo insurance, right? So the policy that covers the actual value of the freight. So for the purpose of today's claim discussion, we're going to use a commonly claimed product. Generically, we'll just say produce, right? Produce can spoil because it's the wrong temperature. It can freeze because it gets too cold. It can rot because it gets too warm. The reefer could break down. I mean, all kinds of stuff, right? And if that product is no good when it gets to the receiver, it could be rejected. Part of the shipment could be rejected while the other portion of it is still accepted. This is the basic situation that'll happen. And what happens then is the customer who owns that freight or that produce is going to say, well, hey, I just lost $50,000 worth of produce, so I need that money for that produce. I hired you to find a truck to get this delivered, right? And now it's destroyed or it's partially destroyed. So we as brokers are not the ones liable for that actual claim, or we're not the ones liable to pay the shipper for that lost product. But we are responsible to ensure that the motor carrier, the truck that we hire, has the proper insurance in place to cover that. Okay? So what will happen is the insurance company for the motor carrier or the truck, they'll be the ones that are actually going to cut the check to pay that shipper for their lost product. But it's not just as simple as you press a button and a check is written. No, there's a process that goes through there. Same thing with a car, right? You get in a car accident. They're going to want to figure out, well, who's at fault? Is it the driver that's at fault? Is it the other driver that's at fault? Was it an act of God? All these different things, right? And that will determine whose policy will cover it, and if that policy is written properly to cover it. So in freight, let's use the example of produce. Did the truck driver make a mistake? Right? Did they not set their reefer to the right temperature? Did they?
Let me ask you something.
Yeah,
Can we
ahead.
go through I want to go through this chronologically because it's been a long time. Like I've worked through them personally, but again, I worked through them with somebody in a department like you that literally did the minutia, the paperwork. I reviewed it, checked it, dealt with the customers, dealt with the carriers. But I'd like to go through like a chronological. So let's take a produce shipment, right? We'll say produce shipment. We'll call it blueberries. They got a pretty high likelihood of expiration. Risk, that's why they're high margin. So I booked a load with a carrier. Okay. They ran the blueberry shipment from, we'll say Fresno to Boston. When it arrived in Boston, I get a call from my shipper. Hey, 30% of this looks like it's spoiled. And I go, okay, now what happens from this point?
I'm going to back you up and explain why there's some important steps beforehand, right? Think about your bill of lading. That is a legal document, and that legal document will follow that shipment all the way from Fresno to Boston. Think about who signs that bill of lading. Your shipper, the driver, and the receiver. And there's a very, very good reason as to why this happens. The shipper inspects their product, makes sure, hey, these blueberries are all good to go. I'm going to sign off on here, and we've got X amount of pallets of blueberries. They're all good to go. It's annotated on the bill of lading how that reefer unit has to be set. Here's the temperature. It's going to be set at continuous versus cycling. That's an important thing, too, to make sure our drivers know that. The driver then accepts that shipment. It's loaded on the truck. They're going to sign off on the bill of lading, acknowledging everything, agreeing to everything, and then it gets to the receiver.
So question there. So let me ask you this too, because we're going to start from the beginning, right? So one, like I guess that's where the shipper, if the unit needs pre-cooled, the guy literally go in and he checks and makes sure the actual reefer was cool when he arrived. But like, how do they check the product? Do the drivers like literally go and walk through and look to see if it's expired, or do they just kind of take the shipper's word for it?
No, I mean, depending on the situation and who the shipper is, there could be a variety of different scenarios that go on there. Because in some customers might have the driver assist in the loading process. It is the driver's responsibility, though, to make sure that they are loading the proper amount of the product and to have a visual on that product. So produce, it'll behoove the driver to be involved in that process to at least visually get an eye on that. Some types of produce or product they'll do do a pulp sample and things like that, right, to make sure that the internal temperature is properly where it's supposed to be. In addition to that, as a broker, because you brought up the temperature of the inside of the reefer, think about this. Let's say a driver is, they just had something in their reefer at 60 degrees, and now they have to do a frozen shipment that has to be at, let's say, 0, okay? It takes some time to cool down the entire inside of that trailer, so that driver needs to be aware of how quickly, hey, it's going to take me X amount of time to get my reefer unit to the right temperature. They'll have to make sure that reefer unit is turned on and long enough in advance to be at the right temperature, and they should be checking that. And I know a lot of brokers will ask to see a picture of the thermometer showing what the temperature reading inside that reefer unit is. That is a good pre-dispatch checklist item for you as a freight broker, and a shipper is typically going to want to see that reading themselves as well before they load the product in there.
It's also why why in who you care about in regards to the types of carriers you're putting on your loads, right? I mean, I've run some, and it was a long time ago, and I always had somebody that knew what they were doing when I was running them with them. And I remember we used a lot of the same carriers, and it was for that very reason because, well, it will ultimately, if something goes wrong, fall on their insurance. So they should care enough. But if you've got drivers that, honestly don't have that great relationship with the company they're even working for, and they don't necessarily care, I've heard and been around situations where shippers have tried to get away with this. They're like, hey, half this product's almost bad. So they'll literally put it in the refrigerator or something in their chiller to make it look cool. They'll load it in the truck knowing it won't last 5 days because it only got a day or two. And then they immediately try to jam up the driver intentionally to get back some of their lost inventory. I'm not saying that's like a common thing, but it's
fraud, man. I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen. Mm-hmm. Yep. You're absolutely correct on that. So back to our process here.
So
upon delivery of that shipment, the receiver is then also responsible to sign that bill of lading accepting that shipment, the amount of it, that it's all in good condition, nothing over short, nothing damaged, no claim, right? Now, let's say there is an issue, okay? And for the sake of this scenario, we're going to talk about spoiled product, right? We're not going to talk about something like a part being damaged or a missing pallet or anything like that, because those are other situations, but we'll talk about spoiled product, all right? And I want to preface by saying documentation and having a sense of urgency are two extremely important things to be aware of when it comes to any kind of potential claim, okay? The longer it's been since there's a claim that we think is going to arise versus when we 100% determine that, the longer it's been, the harder it is to figure out whose fault it is and what happened, right? Because think about this. Shipment delivers, and we think the product is spoiled. It gets pulled off, and it just sits on a dock at room temperature, which could be 80 degrees in some locations. Well, it's definitely going to be spoiled 12 hours from now if we don't actually have a inspection done on it, right, to figure out exactly what is going on with the shipment and potentially who's at fault, versus, hey, we inspected it as soon as it got there and we're able to determine that it was spoiled while in transit, versus, well, how do we know if it was in transit, or is it partially because it was sitting on the dock at 80 degrees, all kinds of stuff. So documentation is going to be extremely important, and then sense of urgency as well. So USDA inspections are big, right? So if there's anything in question about the status of the produce or of the product, and you want to have a professional come in and inspect it, highly encourage you to do that. USDA inspection can be ordered by the receiver to have somebody come in and actually do an in-depth inspection to determine as a third party who's not involved, right, to determine not who's at fault, but to give you facts. Here's what we know, and then the insurance adjusters can then make their determination.
How does somebody find one of those, by the way?
So if you go to USDA.gov, you'll be able to see the entire process if you want to know that, based on the commodity that you're working with, the locations of these different regional offices, and their costs that they actually charge, depending on which commodity it is. It could be the amount of time that they spend per hour, or In some cases, it's depending on the volume or the amount of that product that they have to inspect. So, interesting stuff. USDA.gov. If you just Google USDA inspection produce or whatever, you'll be able to find that link right on their website, part of the Department of Agriculture. So, those. But so I guess the big takeaway here is you're obviously as a broker, you're not there, you're not on site, you don't have a visual on it. It's not your responsibility to call that inspection. The receiver, especially considering the receiver wants to, it's in their best interest to try and free themselves of any liability, right? They want to clear themselves of the ones being liable for the damage. They're going to want to have a USDA rep from Department of Agriculture perform that inspection and provide the facts and their findings. So now let's go through how the claim process actually follows through, or how it actually takes place. Because as a broker, we do have first of all, we have a vested interest in this, right? Because our customer has a loss, and we want them to be made whole of this loss, okay? So the typical way that it'll work now for someone that's a small broker that's just operating by themselves or in a small operation, likely the same person that's booking the shipment is going to handle the claim as well. Whereas if you work for a larger organization, or maybe you're a freight agent for a company, they probably have someone identified, and that's their job, or one of their many jobs is to handle the facilitation of claims. So what they're going to do is they're going to work between all the parties involved, and one of the big parties there is going to be the carrier's insurance company. So whoever writes that policy for that motor carrier, that's who the claim will be filed with. The same way that if you get in a car accident, you would file a claim with the insurance company. Okay. These claims processes can take quite some time. It could be, we'd love to say it all can happen within a couple of days, but it doesn't. It could be months, right? I've seen claims that go on for 5 or 6 months because people are disputing back and forth, and I don't agree to this, I don't agree to that, and there's such a lack of information and documentation that it's so hard to make a determination. And at the end of the day, someone's got to settle and say, hey, we're gonna split this down the middle. We'll take some of the fault on it. You'll take some of the fault on it. That's not the ideal situation. A good situation, if everything's documented properly and everything's done in a timely manner, right? It's very clear who's at fault here, and then that insurance company will settle that claim and cut the check out to the shipper or whoever's product it is. It could be the receiver who ordered that shipment inbound towards them. So did you guys, so I would imagine you came from a big box brokerage. You probably had a claims division or a representative on a certain team that these were how did that work for you?
We had a claims department, and then we basically facilitated everything. So like the last claim I worked on, and this was actually the one where there was a fatality in it. I've told the story on there. The truck driver had a heart attack and was on an interstate and veered off the road intentionally to, what they could tell, to not hit a rest stop, drove his truck into a tree, and total loss. I mean, burned to the ground, everything. We didn't find out for like 2-3 days until they found the wreck. They worked back through. We were check calling it, couldn't find it. Long story short, that was the claim. The claim was they were insulated steel wire. So it looked like the stuff they run on telephone poles, right? So it was bundled up. It was in coils on the flatbed. Total loss of the truck, total loss of all the cargo. So what we then did was I worked back to the customer to got the established value, their cost, what they stated the value was. I facilitated those documents. The claims department then worked with the carrier's insurance. So I got the documents from the shipper, sent the values over. They would then send me basically exactly what you said. The insurance company would say, hey, this is what we've established the value as. This is what we've established the cleanup cost to be. This is what we established the value of the truck to be. This is the funds being dispersed to them. The funds being dispersed to the shipper. And then I think actually our money for the shipment was actually in there too, because I think us, the brokerage, were made whole for, and I don't know if money ever changed hands actually for the price of the actual shipment, because the load clearly didn't get delivered. Yeah. And
Yeah,
again,
I've
this was
seen
like a couple years ago, but
the majority of claims I've seen, the shipper's not going to pay that freight bill, and the carrier's
Yeah.
not going to get paid. I have seen certain companies where they make it very clear in their contracts that claims are handled 100% separately from freight charges, and they will literally continue to invoice and call a customer and say you need to pay your freight bill when there's a claim that's been in the process for 120 days or 150 days, and the customer's like, we're not paying this. Like, our product was damaged. So, realistically, at the end of the day, usually the freight bill is not paid, and the carrier... at the end of the day, that freight bill is typically not paid. So the customer's not going to pay the freight charge, and the carrier's not going to receive payment for it, assuming the carrier's at fault on it. So... this is why, I mean, put yourself in the shoes of the driver, right? If they get to a location and a product's rejected, think about how they're emotionally feeling, and this is where you as a broker can step in and try to assist, right? You know, you want to try and support that driver as much as possible. They may have no idea what happened, right? Their reefer might have broke down and they had no idea when it happened or that it happened at all, right? Or it could be that they get there and they're being told to open their doors up. We'll have someone right there to offload the product. Next thing you know, they're waiting 3 hours and all that outside warm air is getting inside their trailer. You know, you need to make sure you tell them, like, document the times on this stuff, right? Take pictures of everything so they can, you know, cover their own butt on the situation.
it's all
You should be able
CYA.
to advocate for your drivers.
It's all cover your ass in these scenarios, right? Documenting when you arrive, having the driver document when he checked in, having the driver write down just on the BOL, just in a pencil. It doesn't even matter, like a pen if he's got it, obviously. But hey, I checked in here. You know, they came. I pulled up to the dock here. They opened my door here. Product didn't get out until here. Because again, I mean, just to give you the analogy, imagine you just bought a bunch of groceries, put them all in your refrigerator, and then put your refrigerator outside and then open the door in Florida, right? And I mean, it's not always the case that the weather's that hot outside, but like in a lot of cases, that's exactly what's happening.
Great analogy, though. It's the same concept.
Yeah.
Because something that requires cold storage should be taken from cold storage, loaded right onto a cold trailer, and offloaded right into cold storage. That's how it should work. The more time that it spends not in cold storage is going to increase your potential of claim. You'll also find situations, too, where, let's say that same example, right, where the doors are opened up and they ended up waiting an extended period of time before they got offloaded. Well, your customer might say, oh, this stuff's all spoiled. Well, in reality, no, it's not, because the stuff at the end of the trailer, sure, it might be spoiled or it might be no good anymore because it was exposed to warmer temperatures, but all the way in the back of that trailer, up towards the reefer unit, it's still going to be just fine there. And that's where that USDA inspection is going to come into play, and they're going to give you their facts and their findings on that. So you don't ever want to feel like you're bullied by the receiver in these situations. And the carrier especially, right? Because they may or may not be at fault, but they need to make sure that they're doing everything in their power to protect themselves and clear themselves of liability if they are not at fault.
So let me ask you this. Let's go through a couple instances where a broker might be held responsible, right?
I've got a few examples of those from a previous company I worked for.
Throw a couple out. We don't have to identify where they.
I've probably told this story before. I had a guy that moved. He did potatoes and onions, and so reefer units are not just used to cool things; they're also used to keep temperatures at a certain higher temperature in the cold months. So instead of having a temperature-controlled unit to keep the potatoes and onions at a safe, adequate temperature level during the winter months, he would hire drivers that had a vented van and have them throw a propane heater inside of it. And was like, oh, this'll do. Just go buy one of those propane heaters for $100, throw it inside your trailer. But what happens when those things tip over? They have a safety feature that will turn them off so nothing starts on fire. Well, he did this with probably a dozen different shipments. This is 7-8 years ago. And eventually, they're like, dude, your broker told us, the carrier's we did everything the broker told us to do. He told us to, this is the equipment type we needed. And here's the email stating that, hey, here's the propane heater you can go get for $150.
Here's the reimbursement.
And it ended up we as the brokerage were held liable for it. So he was the one that it came out of his commission. But That's an instance where it's not the driver or carrier's fault. It's not the shipper or receiver's fault. That's on the broker for hiring the wrong equipment type to go in there and handle that that load. And we've seen it happen with. Think about if a customer if it's an open deck, right, and they're like, well, this needs this needs to be tarped, and they don't tarp it, and then next thing you know, like there's damage because there was hail or you name it. It could be like just debris from the highway gets kicked up and dings against a piece of machinery or equipment, right? And that comes down to the broker being negligent in hiring the wrong equipment type or contracting the wrong equipment type to go haul that shipment. So don't be that broker that tries to save money and make extra profit on your loads by cutting a corner or taking a shortcut and sending the wrong equipment in there. You need to be professional and dot your I's and cross your T's whenever you're handling someone else's shipment like that. So that's an example of where the broker is held liable. Now, let's give you an example of where we've talked about the carrier, right? It could be a reefer breakdown. They could have set their reefer to the wrong temperature. Hey, Fahrenheit and Celsius, right? Make sure you're very, very specific in this, right? We typically deal in Fahrenheit here, but make sure that's how you're putting that stuff on your rate confirmation. It could be that they had it on cycling instead of continuous. So instead of it staying continuously at, we'll say 36 degrees, they have it cycling. So next thing you know, it kicks off and it gets too warm or too cold depending on the time of year inside that trailer, and they're outside of that level of tolerance for that specific product. That's going to be on the carrier. And, oh, by the way, depending on your carrier's insurance policy that they have, they might have reefer breakdown included in their policy, or they might not have reefer breakdown included in their policy. You get what you pay for with insurance. So that's the kind of stuff that you'll run into with claims. Now, when is it the shipper or receiver's fault? The product was spoiled before it gets loaded. The receiver tells the driver to open their doors up. We'll be right there. And then they wait 3 hours and it gets spoiled. The loading or unloading process, it gets hit by a fork tine from a forklift. This is where pictures are all very, very important, right? It's not properly blocked or braced, which, hey, the driver should be inspecting the inside of their trailer to make sure stuff's properly blocked and braced and secured inside of their equipment. But those are examples of different parties involved and where and when they may be the ones that are at fault in the situation. And now you can see, well, it could be the broker's fault, the shipper receiver's fault, or the carrier's fault. This is why it behooves all of us to document and record everything possible to make sure that we are alleviating ourselves from any potential liability in these sort of situations.
Here's a question for you. So let's say in the instance the broker puts on there, 35 degrees, but the BOL says 30.
BOL that's your binding document to answer your question.
So something helpful that you can always throw in your rate cons is I always had in there to like specific verbiage that I got from legal that said to refer always to the BOL. So like even though we put, and you would check the degrees, you would call the driver before he arrived, confirm that he set his reefer temp there, always still reverts to the BOL, right? So that the liability also and responsibility falls on there.
Yep. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And think about the reasoning behind that, right? The broker may have been told over the phone what the temperature is, and then they tell it over the phone to the driver. At the end of the day, the person giving or putting that shipment onto the truck is the shipper, who's physically there in person, who is signing that BOL along with that driver who is physically on site, can see it visually, and is also signing that BOL. That BOL is a legal document. Just keep that in mind. Good stuff on claims. My big takeaway and my big tips on claims are if you have the slightest inkling that there could be a claim, get ahead of it. Let your customer know, because bad news gets worse with time, right? So don't wait to tell them, and they think all is hunky-dory, and then they find out the next morning that their receiver rejected the shipment, okay? So get ahead of it. And also advocate for your drivers and make recommendations over the phone, whether it's that getting the inspection done or taking pictures of the product itself, taking pictures of the temperature recorder inside the reefer unit, logging the times of arrival and loading and unloading and all that stuff. There's a reason that your TMS has the ability for you to mark check calls and arrival times and departure times and notes and all that stuff. It's so you can also document from your perspective what's going on throughout that process. So attention to detail, sense of urgency, and always treat everybody with respect too, because nobody likes when claims happen, right? Nothing's worse than getting in a car accident and the other person's like, it was your fault. No, it was your fault. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, hey, this sucks it happened. It was a little fender bender, but let's take pictures, let's get the police report done and all that good stuff. So think of the USDA inspection like a police report, right? They're not saying who's at fault. They're just going to document what they can say is fact. Good stuff.
What do we got from our folks over at Lean?
Yeah, so we got some fun stuff coming up with Lean before we get into talking about them a little bit. But every quarter we're going to be doing a new topic that kind of highlights things in the industry with them, accompanied by an episode as well as some videos on it. This coming quarter, Q2, we're going to talk about the labor shortage and how that's affected all of us in the brokerage world. But as you're growing your brokerage, if you're looking to hire folks to fill seats for operations, sales, maybe you need a website revamped or something done on the tech side, maybe you need some marketing support for your organization, check out Lean. It's Lean Solutions Group, leangroup.com. They've got those 4 main areas. So they got sales, staffing, tech, and marketing. Check them out at leangroup.com. They're a great option for you as far as, especially on the staffing side, and obviously we'll talk more about that as we get into Q2 here with the labor shortage and the Great Resignation. But a lot of options there. It's always worth a phone call to explore your situation and see what kind of possibilities are there for you. You can typically get about half the cost of what it would cost somebody in the United States here if you could even find labor right now in the United States or in your area. You could find someone remote who's trained in brokerage and just has to learn the ropes of your TMS and your operating procedures. So check them out again at leangroup.com. And we've got 2 questions here today from the community. One of them actually has to do somewhat with claims, but the first one is about single shipment or single pallet shipments. How can I quote a single pallet shipment? So for those of you that are big on full truckload, and your customer is like, hey, I got 2 pallets to ship. And you're like, I don't do anything less than a full truckload, and you just shy away from it. You may be leaving business or opportunities on the table. So don't be afraid to look at LTL or partials as an option. So to answer the question, you have some options when it comes to single pallets. Typically, LTL is going to be your best bet. Probably the most cost-effective way to do it. So obviously, a full truckload, you're going to have, you could be 20 pallets, 26, 28, whatever, right? If you just have 1 or 2 pallets that a customer wants to get moved, that's where those LTL carriers are designed to work those types of shipments, right? They're going to consolidate a large volume of small shipments, run them through their network of pre-established service centers, and be able to pick up and deliver that one single pallet for your customer. So if you don't have direct pricing with LTL carriers, you can call them up. Call up your XPOs, your FedEx Freights, your who else have we got out there? Estes, Old Dominion. I mean, there's a ton of them out there, national and regional. You can also talk to like an LTL brokerage who specializes in LTL shipping, and you can do a co-brokerage agreement to get some piggyback pricing off of them. But that's my recommendation for single pallet shipping. Very price sensitive is in the LTL world, so you may not be the most competitive at it. I've found that a lot of full truckload brokers, they will only do LTL if their customer has them very, very randomly or rarely, because they already trust you, they already know you, and they're not super price sensitive on it. They want to keep working with one single point of contact. So that's my answer on single pallets.
Same thing. It's the only time I would ever do it, honestly. Single pallets, if it's my customer and I do everything for them, I offer that just so they don't have to go to somebody else. Again, mostly because I don't want somebody else working their way back into my business. So it's more like barrier to entry. I'm like, I don't want my customer calling somebody for 1 pallet, because the next question they're going to ask is, hey, how's your full truckload? And even if I'm doing everything perfect, you never know.
Yep, you're absolutely right. All right, our second and last question here is, should you watch a carrier's deductible before booking them on a load? This comes back to claims. So yes, you should. So what's a deductible in insurance? So a deductible is the amount of money that the insured party, so the carrier in this case, how much they have to pay first before the insurance kicks in. So let's say a carrier, I would consider like $10,000 as a high deductible for a carrier's insurance policy. What does that mean? Well, out of their $100K in cargo insurance, they are responsible to pay the first $10,000 before the insurance picks up and pays out on that claim. So why is that an issue? Well, if you have a $5,000 claim or $5,000 in damage and there's a $10,000 deductible, the insurance company is not writing that check. That money is coming from the carrier, right? Now you're relying on that carrier to pay and make whole your customer for their damage and their losses, instead of an insurance company who's obviously a massive organization that's reputable, and if they don't pay a claim when they're supposed to, they're not going to be in business and have customers. Whereas a carrier, they could dispute it and I'm not paying this. So you have a little bit of risk there. I wouldn't say avoid them at all costs, because a lot of newer carriers, they will choose a high deductible option because their premiums that they pay for their insurance are going to be less, and it's going to cut their initial overhead costs. But it is important that you are aware of that. If you've got 3 carriers as an option and one of them is a high deductible and is a little bit cheaper, it may be better for your customer. Hey, this one costs a little bit more, but hey, it's blueberries, or it's you name it that's high, higher on the claims risk. So in the case of a claim, we're going to feel a lot more comfortable with someone who does not have that high deductible. So a lot of TMS platforms can be set up where when they see that there's a high deductible on that carrier's insurance, it'll warn you. I've seen that in the system where it's going to require an override, or it'll just kind of pop up as a message on your screen and just flag it like, hey, just FYI, this MC number, they've got a $10,000 deductible on their insurance. So yes, I do recommend looking out for that, but don't be discouraged. It's the same thing with conditional carriers, right? You can have a conditional carrier that is doing all the right things to make things better, and they're a lot more reliable now than some of those satisfactory carriers. So
it's funny you said that. I remember that when I used to work in a bank, there was one of the senior guys there used to make the same argument about somebody that had a bankruptcy. Even if it was a little bit longer ago, he used to say, look, the guys that have had that happen to them, or gals, are 10 times as likely to prevent it from ever happening again than somebody that hasn't gone through it.
We learn from mistakes most of the time. Not everyone, but most of us do.
We learn by making mistakes. We don't learn from all of our mistakes.
This is true. This is true. Yep. Pain is a very memorable thing, especially when it comes to making painful mistakes in business. So, well, good episode. Hopefully that gives you guys all a little bit of an insight to the claims process. Again, you're most likely, as a new broker, if you're working at a big box organization, you're not the one that's going to be doing the whole claims process. But hey, if you went out there and you open up your own shop, you're wearing that hat. So be prepared if that happens, that you're going to be the one that's facilitating this. You're the one that's going to be working with the carrier's insurance company and facilitating back and forth between the insurance company and your customer and getting all the information, all the documentation. That's you. That's your job. So good stuff. Good stuff. Anything else we got on the docket today?
Nope. In the show notes, we'll still have the fund for Ukraine for the Guardian Angel Fund. So, even if it's $5, all of it is going to a great cause. We greatly appreciate any of your support from any of our listeners out there. You can find it in the show notes.
Yep, and the FreightWaves article on there as well, if you want to read that. Any final thoughts here, Ben?
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills! That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. If you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.